It was at high noon, on a Utah campus with the deceptive blandness of any American university quadrangle, that Charlie Kirk's life met its theatrical terminus. The co-founder of Turning Point USA, a man who made a career of convincing gullible undergraduates that the New Deal was Stalinism with a smile, was struck down by a single bullet to the neck while pontificating at his portable "Prove Me Wrong" stall. For a moment, and only a moment, the red flow that soaked through his shirt seemed the only unscripted thing Kirk had ever produced. He slumped from his chair, his audience scattered in terror, and in a scene as American as apple pie and hollow platitudes, his death became instant political theater. President Donald J. Trump, a man congenitally incapable of dignity, rushed to Truth Social to declare, "The great and even legendary Charlie Kirk is dead." No one understood or had the heart of the youth in the United States of America better than Charlie. He was loved and admired by all, especially me, and now he is no longer with us. Flags were ordered half-mast, as if the nation itself should bow in obeisance. One cannot help noticing that when children are gunned down in classrooms, no such order is issued. The arithmetic of grief in America is clear. One ambitious propagandist outweighs dozens of anonymous children in the calculus of official mourning. This, of course, is not a novel observation. After Columbine in 1999, Sandy Hook in 2012, Uvalde in 2022, and, on the very same day as Kirk's assassination, Evergreen High School in Colorado, the corpses of children were heaped on the altar of freedom, with scarcely a symbolic gesture from the Republic's custodians. At Evergreen, a boy scarcely old enough to drive used a revolver to shoot two of his classmates, leaving them in critical condition. Parents were corralled into the car park of a nearby elementary school for the ritual of tearful reunions and, for some, the irreversible sundering. All this played out while in Utah, scarcely an hour's flight away, Kirk's demise commanded presidential elegy and wall-to-wall cable coverage. One might think the coincidence, the violent truncation of adolescent lives, and the violent truncation of a political one would provoke a national meditation on the common denominator. But America is uniquely adept at compartmentalization. The high school dead are mere statistics in an ongoing cultural war against arithmetic, while Kirk is lionized as a martyr to conservatism. Charlie Kirk was 31 years old, with a wife and 2 children, and the co-founder of an organization whose name, Turning Point USA, implied a seriousness it never deserved. The enterprise was less a think tank than a marketing agency for resentment. It specialized in turning adolescent insecurity into Republican ballots, and did so with an aplomb that impressed Donald Trump, whose electoral base requires a constant inflow of the barely literate and the newly radicalized. Kirk had refined the template of the collegiate demagogue. He would set up a collapsible table on campus, emblazoned with slogans like "Prove Me Wrong," and invite the credulous or the unpracticed to joust with him. The format guaranteed his triumph. It is a simple matter for a trained polemicist to belittle a 19-year-old in public, especially when backed by a friendly camera crew and an online echo chamber, eager to christen every fumble a liberal meltdown. That he could parlay this carnival barker routine into a personal fiefdom within the Republican Party says less about Kirk's talents than about the party's own intellectual malnutrition. It is perhaps his only genuine accomplishment that he helped swell Republican support among 18 to 24-year-olds, though this was achieved less through persuasion than through a kind of political fraternization. Beer pong politics, frat house patriotism, and a coarse dismissal of nuance did the work. Governor Spencer Cox of Utah hastened to call Kirk's killing a political assassination. Perhaps so. Yet one should be clear what the phrase implies. It suggests that Kirk was slain not merely as an individual, but as a symbol of a movement, a martyr for a cause. But here, the hypocrisy is blinding. For years, Kirk and his compatriots defended the untrammeled right of every emotionally brittle man-child to stockpile firearms. They dismissed every plea for regulation as tyranny. They cheered Supreme Court rulings that treated semi-automatic rifles as household pets. They derided the grieving parents of Sandy Hook as dupes of a liberal cabal. Now, when one of their own is felled by the very instrument they canonized, we are expected to genuflect before the tragedy, to ignore the irony, to forget that this was precisely the America Kirk agitated to create. He wanted a republic armed to the teeth, a culture where masculinity is measured in calibers and clips, and he got it. That the Reaper arrived at his own prove-me-wrong table is less tragedy than consummation. Meanwhile, in Evergreen, Colorado, as the blood of children still dried, local authorities reminded the press that Jefferson County deputies were also the first responders at Columbine. Imagine that. The same sheriff's office, a quarter-century later, once again shepherding children out of classrooms under fire. If Kirk's death was a political assassination, what then is the recurrent slaughter of students? Cultural attrition, acceptable losses. The language gives the game away. When a right-wing propagandist is shot, it is assassination, terrorism, the end of free speech. When children are killed, it is an unspeakable tragedy, which means nothing will be spoken of it. One category prompts presidential decrees, the other presidential shrugs. One invites calls for unity, the other thoughts and prayers. It is worth recalling that in 1968, when Robert F. Kennedy was gunned down in Los Angeles, it was his own brother Ted who stood before the crowd and insisted, "We can move in that direction as a country in greater polarization, or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend." What Kirk's colleagues have chosen instead is polarization, hysteria, the immediate insistence that the left as a whole bears responsibility. The shooter in Utah remains unidentified and at large. One can predict with dreary certainty what will follow. Conspiracy theories, false flag accusations, denunciations of Antifa or BLM, and a renewed lust for security theater on college campuses. Kirk's legacy will be embalmed in grievance. His supporters will not remember the opportunist who made a living sneering at liberal teenagers, but the martyr felled by the woke mob. Yet this too is quintessentially American. The Republic was midwifed in violence, suckled on the myth of the frontier, and addicted to firearms as both tool and totem. Kirk's own career was built on stoking the paranoia that such a culture requires. To die by the gun is not an aberration in America. It is initiation, graduation, and apotheosis. It would be tempting to say that Kirk's death should serve as a wake-up call. But America has long since smashed the alarm clock. From Columbine to Sandy Hook to Uvalde to Evergreen, the warnings have been screamed in gunpowder and blood. Kirk's assassination is not an outlier but a confirmation. In the United States, the gun is both the arbiter and the idol. The very same politicians who couldn't be bothered to learn the names of the children gunned down in Uvalde or Parkland now deliver trembling orations about the sanctity of life. The flag descends to half-mast with unprecedented alacrity. Prayer vigils multiply like loaves and fishes. The word tragedy is deployed without irony by people who just yesterday were explaining why school shootings are statistically insignificant. One is reminded of Orwell's observation about political language being designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable. But even Orwell might have struggled to imagine a political class so shameless that it could look parents of murdered children in the eye and explain that their loss was acceptable collateral damage, while simultaneously demanding national mourning for one of their own fallen soldiers in the culture war. Let us for a moment perform the courtesy his admirers will not, to assess his life without either canonization or damnation. Kirk was clever enough to ride the slipstream of Trumpism, but too shallow to transcend it. He understood resentment but not argument, posture but not philosophy. His contribution to American politics was the elevation of trolling into strategy, sneer into sermon, and meme into manifesto. As I once wrote of Jerry Falwell, so I shall repeat of Charlie Kirk. If you gave him an enema, you could bury him in a matchbox. But the empire he served, the empire of credulity, of violence, of cheap patriotism, will continue to demand human sacrifice, and it will get it.